Good. I think, Makoto-san, if you allow, I will.
Yes, please.
Give it a go. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, good afternoon, good evening in the US or in the West. Early good morning in Europe, and yeah, good morning, Ohayo gozaimasu, to Japan and the Eastern participants here. Welcome to the third IBFRA webinar. So this is a run-up of webinars to our next conference. I will explain a little bit about that one. This webinar is about climate change in diverse context of boreal forests. And my name is Florian Kraxner, and I'm the IBFRA president. Well, why we all get together here is, of course, to get more information on forests, in particular the boreal forests, and a reason to really do these webinars and conferences, etc., is that boreal forests absolutely matter. Boreal forests play and will play an important role in meeting our climate goals. The problem is that they really receive also disproportionately low attention in many international processes. And a group of scientists has already recognized more than 30 years ago. The International Boreal Forest Research Association, IBFRA, has been founded in 1991. As a truly international institution by the large boreal countries, including back then USSR, USA, Canada, Nordic countries. And the aim is not only to gather forest experts, but also to bridge to policymakers, the civil society organizations, and other stakeholders from the boreal and also other forest zones. I am myself from Austria, but very active also in boreal research, so we can bridge here also between temperate, boreal, and if necessary also into the tropics. What is our mission? Yes, to promote and coordinate the inter and transdisciplinary research to increase the understanding of the role of the circumboreal forests in the global environment and the effects of environmental change on that role. We have here a very long White Sea Declaration from 1991, which can be all looked up at our webpage, of course, who is interested in that, but most importantly are the products. And we do comprehensive studies of boreal forests and evaluating their role in providing stability of the Earth climate system and global bioeconomy. For instance, we published about a year ago the IBFRA Insight Report. This was a first big report of its type, and it can be downloaded also from our website. It was on sustainable boreal forest management. It was a huge effort. We compared all boreal regions here, and for sure this is something like we would like to use in order to promote also our work. We are 15 international experts on the steering group, but of course, many more people are involved in our activities, as has been in this IBFRA Insight Report. We are producing a series of broad international studies, scientific expeditions. All in all, I think it's in the meantime about 700 to 800 peer-reviewed research papers that have been published. And we are most proud of having held already 19 international conferences with about 5,000 participants. And after 19 comes 20, and this is a little hint that, as I mentioned before on the first slide, that this webinar is a series in a run-up to our 20th conference, the IBFRA 2023 this year, held in Helsinki in August from 28th to 31st. And the topic is climate resilient and sustainable forest management. As mentioned, this is the 20th conference of our institution, and the chair is Professor Raisa Mekipe from Luke in Finland. We have decided to go this time for 4 major topics: decision support tools, understanding linkages between ecosystem processes and management, then data acquisition and linking to knowledge creation, and the 4th one, a very interesting one also, gameful forest interaction, with very prominent keynote speakers, including Professor Martin Evans, Professor Karin Oehmann, and Professor Joanne Wade from Canada. Others are from UK and SLU in Sweden. Yeah, I think abstracts have been submitted. They are evaluated at the moment. We will have around 200 participants, and there is a chance to also join virtually. You cannot provide talks, but we can listen in and update yourself on the latest research here. So please visit us in Helsinki in August, end of August this year. Today's webinar has 3 speakers. There is Lee Frelich as a director from the University of Minnesota Center for Forest Ecology in the United States. Mr. Kazumichi Fujii, a senior researcher on forestry and forest products from the FFPRI, so the Forestry and Forest Products Research Institute in Japan. And last not least, the actual host of this webinar meeting, Mr. Makoto Kobayashi. He is an associate professor in Hokkaido University, Hokkaido in Japan. The details Professor Kobayashi will provide you in a few seconds. Last not least, I would like to thank you at this stage already very much for participating in this webinar. I hope you will all enjoy it, and please inform yourself at our webpage, www.ibfra.org. And with that, I would like to hand over to Mr. Kobayashi and explain us a little bit more about the background and the speakers of this webinar. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Florian. Yeah, I'm Makoto Kobayashi, and I want to introduce again briefly about this webinar. Can you hear the slide correctly, Florian?
Yes, if you can go to the presenters mode still. Swap the mode.
Is this?
Can you see? It's okay. Thank you.
Great. Yes. Again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm Makoto Kobayashi, one of the steering members of IBFRA group. Thank you for joining today's webinar. First of all, I want to briefly introduce the concept of this webinar. Yeah, as you know, boreal forest is an important ecosystem. It covers about 1/3 of the entire forest area on the Earth, and it stores more than 1/3 of total terrestrial carbon stock. And the boreal forest provide about 1/3 of lumber production. Yes, yeah, it's clear that the boreal forest is an important ecosystem. But the climate is predicted to be warmer, especially at high latitude, including the area of boreal forest here. Then our question is how this predicted large increase of air temperature will influence the structure and function of boreal forest. Yeah, today it's really exciting to invite 3 speakers who have been studying the influence of climate warming on the plants of boreal forest. The first speaker is Dr. Lee Frelich. Yeah, he's the director of Center for Forest Ecology of University of Minnesota. Yeah, he will talk about the climate change influence in the temperate boreal ecotone of Central North America. And the second speaker is Dr. Kazumichi Fujii. He's a senior researcher in Forestry and Forest Product Research Institute in Japan. He will talk about the influence of climate warming on the tree growth and permafrost in Canada. And lastly, I will briefly talk about how the plants react to the winter climate change in northern Japan. Yeah, as I said, boreal forest is really large ecosystem, so the three scientists have been studying different types of forests, as you can see here. I hope you recognize how the plant reactions are diverse across the boreal forests. And yeah, please enjoy it. Okay, I'd like to invite Dr. Frelich. Yes. Yeah, Lee, can you share the slide?
Yes.
Thank you for waiting.
Go to presenters mode. There we go.
And Makoto and Lee, may I suggest that we have a short Q&A after each of the presentations? And I would like to ask the participants to put their questions forward also in the chat system, and somebody from us will then read it out if you don't want to speak up here.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for organizing this webinar, and I'm happy to talk to you about the forests that we have here in Minnesota, which are right on the ecotone. They're among the southernmost boreal forests in the world, especially at low elevation. Okay, oh, there we go. And so the yellow star here shows again the polar view of the boreal, and we're right on the southern margin in the central part of North America. And if we look in detail here, we have jack pine, black spruce, balsam fir, we have aspen and birch, and also white pine and red pine. So we're just to the northwest of Lake Superior. And the forests are characterized by high intensity, very large fires from 10,000 to 100,000 hectares in size. And they regenerate as even-aged forests with about 100-year fire cycle. This is some regeneration of jack pine after one of these big fires in northern Minnesota. We also have the white and red pine forest, and these are in areas like islands and peninsulas that break the flow of the big fires, and so the fires are not as intense, and so they tend to be uneven aged. Only a few trees are killed in each fire, and some of the trees are up to 400 years old, even with a 100-year fire cycle, because these are partial burns in this particular forest type. So here is a map of Minnesota, and what you notice is the boreal in the dark green in the northeastern part of the state, but we have a lot of ecotones in Minnesota. I like to say we are the edgiest state in the United States. As you can see, we have temperate deciduous forest, and we also have grassland. So we're very similar to Kazakhstan, right at the southern end of the Ural Mountains, where these three biomes come together. So that gives us a very unique place where, with climate change, with all this edge, the boreal forest could end up converting to temperate forest or even to grassland because it's within enough distance given how far these biome boundaries could move in a warming climate. And so this is a picture of boreal forest. This is on what we call the Big Lake, Lake Superior, in northern Minnesota. This is mostly fir here and birch. This is the temperate deciduous, which is sugar maple, basswood, and red oak. So this is something that could replace the boreal in a warmer climate. And here's prairie. Actually, a third of Minnesota originally, before European settlement, was prairie. So what does it take to make a boreal forest? I had a student, Nick Fisicelli, who studied all of these places, and they're in transects from places with cool summers to warm summers, but they all had some temperate and some boreal trees growing at each site. And he wanted to know what is it that actually determines where the boreal and temperate forest boundary is, and the relationship between those two groups of trees. So he did growth measurements, both rings and height growth of saplings in the forest. And here we show balsam fir and white spruce, which are two of the boreal species. And then red maple, sugar maple, and red oak, which are three of the temperate species that are growing on these plots. And if you look across a summer temperature gradient, it turns out that's what determines the growth rate of these different trees. So at the warm end of the gradient, the maples and the oaks outgrow the spruce and fir, and at the cool end of the gradient, it's the opposite. The crossover point is right where the mean summer temperature is about 18.2 degrees Celsius, where they grow about equally. So you can have places where boreal and temperate species are equal competitors, areas where boreal will compete better, and other places where temperate will compete better. So in a warming climate, a boreal forest could easily switch to a climate where the saplings of the temperate species would outgrow the boreal and therefore would replace them. And as I mentioned, we also have the prairie forest border or ecotone in Minnesota, and you see here that ecotone, the forest in green, the prairie in the kind of yellow color there, which was just before European settlement. And I had another PhD student, Nick Dons, who's now a professor at the University of Wisconsin Superior, and it was his PhD topic to figure out what makes forest versus grassland. And it turns out that it's the precipitation minus potential evapotranspiration, which has been found in other parts of the world. On the map on the right, the green and blue areas have an excess of precipitation over evaporation, and those areas support forest, whereas the brown areas have more evaporation than precipitation, and they support grasslands. So here's some projections for our region. For high emission scenario and low emission scenario starting now and going to the end of the century, how much it would warm up during summer. And I already told you mean summer temperature was an important factor for whether boreal or temperate forest would dominate. And it might also, if the temperature warms up enough, raise evaporation enough to change the water balance. So for a high emission or business as usual scenario, plus 5 degrees C for mean summer temperature in northern Minnesota. And for the low emission scenario, only plus 2 degrees C. And this would make a huge difference in how the boreal forest would change. It will not change slides here. Oh, there we go. There we go. So if we put these on, summarize these, again, the temperate forest with warm mean summer temperatures, the boreal with cool mean summer temperatures, and mixed temperate and boreal in between, and then the climatic moisture index, pure prairie if it's minus 50 millimeters water balance, and pure forest if it's plus 50 millimeters, and various mixtures in between. Well, here's what happens if you put those on a map. So right now it looks like the map on the left. So we have the boreal is in blue there, wrapping around the north side of Lake Superior into northern Minnesota. So the current boreal climate is in the very northeastern part of Minnesota. The mixed is the light green, temperate and boreal trees mixed. The yellow is the broadleaf, which is the temperate deciduous forest, and then the prairie on the very left part of the map. So for that low emission scenario, it would not change very much at all. The future map for the low scenario in the upper right looks pretty much like the map that we have currently for the different biomes. However, if we go on the high emission scenario, Minnesota could be 90% prairie and just a tiny percent temperate forest and no boreal at all. So that's what we call the new Kansas. Minnesota could be the new Kansas, and I was quoted as saying in the in the Washington Post that we already have a good Kansas in the United States, which is fine. We don't need a second Kansas in Minnesota. And that particular quote in the Washington Post got me feedback from all over the world, especially from people who don't believe in climate change. But it would be a huge change for the boreal biome to leave Minnesota. So we don't want the high emission scenario. And to do a climate analog, looking at boreal in northern Minnesota at the blue star versus the orange star, which is a place where it's 4 degrees Celsius warmer now, you have this versus this. And the only difference here is, so we found a place that's 4 degrees Celsius warmer in summer. The only difference here is 4 degrees mean temperature difference in the summer. The rock type is pretty much the same. Everything else, the physiography, the soils are the same. So what about the details, the boreal to temperate forest grassland conversion mechanisms? And these are according to this paper, 7 Ways a Warming Climate Can Kill the Southern Boreal Forest, which I published with Rebecca Montgomery and Peter Reich in 2021. Those are listed there. I'll show a slide or two about each. The first is gap dynamics and gradual infiltration of temperate species. So as the old trees die in gaps, you get new seedlings coming up in those gaps. And you see balsam fir, for example, in a gap in a boreal forest in the upper left, black spruce in the lower. So in the ecotone, you often have temperate forest, which is the red here because it's sugar maple, and this is in the autumn in northern Minnesota, so this is mid-September. And the boreal, of course, is all green here. So they're very close to each other, and it's easy for the seeds of the temperate species to get in to the boreal stands. And what we found from this particular study here that was published in Ecology is that throughout this whole region in the ecotone, the boreal stands already have temperate trees in the understory. And as the boreal overstory trees die of old age and gaps form, the temperate trees are taking over those gaps, shown by the red arrow here. And here's the sugar maple tree on the right side, and balsam fir trees. This was 2016 when I was in this area in 1979, way back when I was in college. You could not find a maple tree anywhere here. So the warming that has already occurred is allowing the temperate to invade the boreal forest within the ecotone, where you have a mosaic of the two forest types. Next is a trophic cascade with a delay followed by sudden change. So that 18.2 degrees crossover point becomes 19.5 when you have a high level of deer, because deer eat temperate seedlings like oak and maple more than they would eat fir and spruce. So they delay the invasion of those temperate saplings until a warmer temperature is attained, at which point the boreal forest would die. And it would become light enough that the temperate trees would be able to outgrow the deer. So you would have a delay, suppressed seedlings by the deer. And the deer and the moose will not browse the boreal species. And furthermore, wolves cause a mosaic of these effects across the landscape. So looking at this map, this is northern Wisconsin, which is adjacent to Minnesota. The red areas are wolf pack territories. Within those wolf pack territories, the deer leave and they go in the spaces between the wolf pack territories. So you have a mosaic of places where the temperate saplings are not being eaten and they can freely invade the boreal, and other places where they are being eaten by deer, and you have this delay in the advance of the temperate species as the climate warms. Next is wind and hail storms. We get storms called derechos, which are severe thunderstorms. They can have winds of 55 meters per second. And this particular one here in 1999 crossed half of the North American continent. You can see how the trees are bent there. And here's before and after. in the boreal forest in northern Minnesota. And it was about 400,000 hectares that was completely leveled by one thunderstorm in about an hour. But if you look closely, you'll see the understory trees are still there. And here we are walking around after the blowdown, and these are all small black spruce saplings that did not blow down. That was 1999. Now, in 2023, we have understory, and you see the red trees here. Those are red maple, which are shade tolerant in the understory of this. It's a birch, aspen, spruce, and fir boreal forest. And if that blew down in a windstorm, it would be instant transition from boreal to temperate. The understory would be released all at once. Next is wind and fire. Here's an old boreal forest in northern Minnesota. Here it is after the 1999 blowdown. This is one of my long-term permanent plots. The trees were 200 years old. Now they're just slash on the ground. Then it burned in a fire. And 5 years post-fire, it's a birch forest. And it turns out that wind plus fire is exterminating the conifers. It's occurring, windstorms are occurring further north than they used to from these big thunderstorms in the boreal forest, and that never used to happen. And then the slash from the windfall burns, and the conifers are exterminated by that, and you either get the birch and aspen, so it's converting it to boreal birch and aspen, or in warmer areas, oaks and maples. So wind plus fire means that compound disturbance means major forest transformation over large areas in a short time, like you see in this picture here. This had been jack pine and black spruce for 7,000 or 8,000 years, according to the paleo data, but not after this wind and fire. Heat and drought stress. West of Minnesota, out in Western Canada, Alberta, Saskatchewan, some of the forests have died from drought stress. This is a summer picture, actually, midsummer, of an aspen forest right at the prairie edge, right at the prairie forest ecotone, and the trees are dead from drought. And this is starting to happen in Minnesota. These are paper birch. We had millions of paper birch die in droughts in heat waves during summer. And again, paper birch is a boreal species. Last summer, we started to have fir trees dying and jack pine for the first time in Minnesota. And of course, this can help release any oak and maple in the understory, which are adapted to warmer climates. Insect infestation, both native and exotic due to lack of extreme cold, is another factor. Mountain pine beetle is native to Western North America. It could come to Minnesota. It's limited by winter minimums of minus 40 degrees Celsius. It's a stretch to not get that cold in northern Minnesota, but eventually it will warm up enough that it will no longer get that cold. This winter, for example, the coldest temperature recorded in northern Minnesota was minus 39.5 Celsius. That is considered very mild. In 2019, it was, let's see, minus 56 F, which would be maybe minus 49 Celsius. And that's pretty common, but if it starts never getting colder than minus 40, these beetles could invade and kill our pine forest. And then finally, phenological disturbance. So in March of 2012, we had thousands of record high temperatures during March. It was 26 degrees Celsius in March in Minnesota. I mean, all my students at the university went to Florida for spring break, and it was warmer in Minnesota than it was in Florida. When they got back, I said, what did you go to Florida for? And magnolias were in bloom in March in Minnesota, which is incredible. Normally, they would bloom the second week of May. And the question is, what happens if this warm temperatures go into the boreal forest? Well, this is what happened. By May and June, because the trees came out of dormancy too early, and then ironically they froze after coming out of dormancy too early and the foliage was killed. And now one spring like this didn't completely kill all the trees because they had energy reserves, and after 3 or 4 years they recovered. So they did grow new needles, but 2 springs in a row like this could wipe out all the boreal forest from Minnesota all the way out to Quebec. So because with 2 springs in a row, they would not have the energy to recover. So the trees would all die. And for the business as usual warming scenario, by 2090, every spring would be as warm as the spring of 2012. So we really need to have this low emission scenario. So lots of mechanisms here by which the forest can change. All of these mechanisms operate across large area of land, millions of hectares. Only one of them is a gradual transition in forest type. All the others at the level of a hectare or even 10 or even thousands of hectares would be almost an instant transformation, or at least only within a handful of years. So this forest you see in this picture here, which is the Boundary Waters Wilderness in northern Minnesota, which is boreal forest right now, could be subject to lots of these mechanisms. There's lots of redundancy. Any 1 hectare or any 1 stand of trees could be hit by any one of them. It's a matter of which one hits first in a given location. At landscape and even ecoregion scales, there would be a mosaic of different conversion mechanisms across the landscape and different rates of change. And how much land would change? Well, this heavy black line is the current boreal, northern Minnesota right here. All of this for business as usual could change to grassland, and all of this to temperate forest. And that would be 5 times the size of Minnesota, or 2.5 times the size of Japan. All that would be converted to a different biome, which means the existing trees would die. There would be a big pulse of carbon to the atmosphere, and that's why the Tim Lenton in that paper about tipping points put a tipping point on the southern edge of the boreal forest in North America, because that much forest could die in a pretty short time, and that would be one of the world's tipping points. What about the temperate forest that might replace them? We've typically had old growth sugar maple that lived for hundreds of years with lots of wildflowers. However, there are novel filters on the composition of forests now. High deer populations, invasion of European earthworms have changed the soils. The European earthworms have warmed up the soils by 4 to 6 degrees Celsius. So climate change has already occurred in the root systems of the trees in a lot of places. So that even the new temperate forest that we might get would be completely different from what we historically had. And with that, I'll leave you with this picture of an aspen and birch forest after wind and fire, which used to be a pine forest for thousands of years, converted in the last decade by these novel compound disturbances.
Yeah, Dr. Frelich, thank you very much for the exciting talks with many, stunning pictures, and also the comprehensive introductions, how the boreal forests are exposed to multiple environmental changes. Now I want to invite any comments and questions to this talk. You can put your question to the chat, or you can just simply raise your hand to do the questions. Any questions from the audience?
If you allow, I would like to break the ice a little bit here.
Yes.
And would like to thank Lee for this excellent presentation. And it's actually shocking how fast this goes and continues, and the outlook, as we all know, we are not really on a 2-degree pathway, are not the best. On the other hand, there are big expectations from our forests, particularly from the large boreal forest, to help us mitigate climate change. Now we see that actually climate change has damaged the forest already that much that it is just a brink away, a very small step to really kill it and transform it completely. How do you think the forest, particularly now what you have shown in Minnesota, can still contribute and live up to its ecosystem services or climate change mitigation in particular by carbon storage, etc. in the future? Will this also drastically drop? Will we see the same fate like happened to Alaska, for instance, which changed, according to my knowledge, within the last 10 years from a large sink to a source, actually? Is this what you foresee, or is there hope?
Well, there's only hope if we go on the low emission scenario. If we have the business as usual scenario, gigantic swaths of the boreal forest will look like this here all at the same time. There'll be so many young forests, young temperate forests, young boreal forest maybe, but it'll be birch and aspen instead of conifers. In some places, the conifers won't be able to regenerate. The temperate species will be too far away to get there. The seed source will be too far away, and it could end up being shrubland. And so the transition would be really messy for that high warming scenario. I think the boreal forest would become a source of carbon worldwide, because we also published a paper showing this same thing would happen in Europe, that the Norway spruce and Scots pine could be replaced by a temperate forest zone. But it's going to take decades, if not a few centuries, for that new vegetation to become organized and to mature. So there would be, let me put it this way, I don't see how we could avoid having a period that would last at least a century where the whole boreal ecosystem would be disorganized and would be in the process of reorganizing, would be mostly shrubby, mostly small trees, brushy type of vegetation.
Can we help with assisted migration or similar techniques?
Yeah, the assisted migration could help. For example, in this forest here, if the boreal forest could no longer grow here due to the climate, we could bring in maple and oak. Those are good species and they produce good lumber. But obviously, for several decades, the forest would have almost no productivity from a lumber point of view, and it would have just given off a huge amount of carbon to the atmosphere. Yeah, it's going to be hard to avoid that, just like in the Amazon, they're predicting that with the business as usual scenario, it could tip over into a savanna. And the same thing could happen to huge areas of the boreal, especially through the central part of Russia and Mongolia and northeastern China. There's a lot of places there that are actually interior continental, and they're actually fairly similar to northern Minnesota, that they could switch over to savannas or even grasslands. So it's a huge area that we're talking about, and I don't see any way around that scenario that I just described for the business as usual carbon emission scenario. It's exciting, but I wish I was studying something else. I mean, it's interesting and very depressing at the same time, because the boreal forests are so beautiful.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, we have a question from Dr. Hisashi Sato from Jamstack. Can you talk? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for your comprehensive talk about possible transition from boreal forest to temperate forest or more shrubby biomes. And I'm studying I am developing a biome boundary modeling is particular for the boreal temperate region. So I'm curious about the mechanism that drives that transition, and it's very diverse transition mechanism exists in North America. And you mentioned about possibility that the transition would be under control of earthworm as well as the deers, but you didn't mention you didn't explain it in detail. So I'm curious about how deers and earthworm would pose influence on the biome transition for this area.
Yeah, that's the question about deer and earthworm is a very good question. I can give an entire lecture on that topic because I've done a lot of earthworm research. So there are no native earthworms in the boreal forest in North America. So there are European earthworms that are invading right now that come from Scandinavia, and they eat the forest floor. So they basically accelerate the recycling of nutrients. So they eat the forest floor in any 1 square meter. They'll eat the forest floor in 1 summer as the invading front of worms moves through the forest. And they release those nutrients so fast that the trees cannot soak them up. So they actually leach out of the forest. And after the earthworm invasion is complete, the forest has lost a lot of its nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, and calcium because it was released too fast for the trees to take it up. And without the organic horizon present, then the soil is no longer insulated and it gets much warmer in the summer. And that causes heat stress for the root systems. And it also causes more evaporation from the soil, so it becomes much droughtier. So much more nutrient poor, much droughtier, which would tend to send it towards oak instead of maple. Oak can generally tolerate more droughts than maple, at least our species of oak, and can grow in areas with poorer nutrients. But yeah, that's what goes on. And then the other thing that happens is when the worms invade, the standing crop of native plants is wiped out because they're rooted in the organic horizon. And then the deer to plant ratio changes. You still have the same number of deer, but there's much fewer plants. So the deer eat all the rest of the plants. And then you have a completely bare forest floor. It's just bare mineral soil and it's subject to erosion, actually. Even under a forest canopy, we're getting massive soil erosion. And even in old growth forests that are invaded by these earthworms. So the ecosystem here is not adapted to integrate earthworms into the ecosystem function like they are in Europe, because the trees and the earthworms in Europe co-evolved with each other, and the same with the Amynthus earthworms that you have in Asia and your forest. The forest and those earthworms are co-evolved to each other's presence, whereas in North America, they're not. And it will take centuries, I think, for the ecosystem to reorganize itself so that the earthworms are integrated into the function of the ecosystem. And the deer, they just put extra stress on the trees, especially the regeneration, the seedlings. The worms put stress on the regeneration and the deer put more stress on it. And they exacerbate each other, those two factors.
Yeah, thank you very much for your good explanation.
Yes,
so in my understanding, earthworm depends on the temperate forest. So it is not the temperature that limits to penetrate the distribution into the boreal forest. It's a biome condition that limits the settlement of the earthworms in boreal forest. So even if we expect a global warming occurs for this area, and even if the temperature allows temperate forest to establish and growth there, still, even under such a case, still we cannot expect that earthworm can penetrate, catch up to the temperature changes because due to the biome composition is still boreal. So is it correct my understanding?
Not everywhere. Not everywhere. Yeah, where it's very rocky, like some parts of northern Minnesota that I showed in these pictures, the earthworms might have a problem because the soil isn't deep enough to go down, and they have to go down to avoid freezing in the winter. But in deep soil areas, as soon as the permafrost is gone, the European earthworms can invade. So, and especially if you get wind and fire like shown in this picture, and you have birch and aspen, and the leaves of birch and aspen are palatable to earthworms, whereas the needles of conifers are not. So if the warming climate converts conifers into birch and aspen, and the permafrost disappears, and you have deep enough soil, the earthworms can invade any part of the boreal. But that's a unique set of earthworms that come from Scandinavia. Not all earthworms can tolerate temperatures that cold. I doubt that the Amynthus could. So unless you do a stupid thing like introduce European earthworms into your Asian forests, which you should not do, your statement is probably completely correct for the situation that you have in Japan and China and the temperate boreal ecotone that you have in Asia. Your statement is correct, but in Europe and in North America with European invading earthworms, it doesn't work out that way.
Yeah, I understood. Yeah, thank you very much. It's very interesting. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the active discussions. I actually have many questions, but because of the time limited, I want to go to the second. I want to invite the second speakers. Thank you, Dr. Frelich. It was very exciting.
You're welcome.
And the second speaker is Kazumichi Fujii. Now, a topic about the permafrost showed up a little bit, but he will introduce more in detail about how the permafrost would differentiate the reaction of the trees to the climate warming. Yeah, Fujii-san, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, I will start. Today, I would like to have a talk on soil and tree rings. Yeah, I'm actually an expert on soil, not forest and tree rings, but I want to combine the soil science and dendrochronology in this research. ちょっと待って。動かない。ちょっと待ってくださいね。
大丈夫です。
はい。Can you see? Okay. Today I'd like to introduce the drunken forest without beer in Canada on continuous permafrost in Canada. The paper is published in Global Change Biology. As you know, the climate warming is decreasing the Arctic ice, and there is a feedback between climate and plant and soil. But the limitation information is still limited in the remote area, and it's not supported by field evidence. That's why I visited Inuvik. It's very remote area, but climate warming is very significant. The 4 degrees per in recent 50 years. And the trees are grow thanks to trees, we can reconstruct the past environmental changes for 200 years using the trees growing on clay and sandy soils. This tree is records 200 years history, and usually finally we can find 10 tree rings in 1 millimeter tree ring. Yep. Usually the question is why the trees are drunken on permafrost. One of the hypotheses is permafrost degradation. The losing soil foundation causes tree leaning. That is one hypothesis, and that is shown by Al Gore and Inconvenient Truth. But the inconvenient truth for him is drunken forest exists from before the climate warming starts. Actually, the formation of drunken forest is natural process in continuous permafrost zone due to uneven micro relief. So question is why what drives the formation of drunken forest? The losing soil foundation or frost heaving in winter. The clue exists in soil and woods. For example, gradually the mounds are formed and the tree starts to lean, so that the tree leaning events can be resisted and recorded in tree rings. And we can see the dark area, that is the deposition of lignin. So using the unique trait of the conifer trees that reinforce their trunk by forming wider and darker tree rings, we can reconstruct the formation history of soil hummocks. Yeah, the experiment is not easy in Ubik because the experimental site is governed by Native People Committee. So I got permission. Initially, I need to get permission from the committee to cut 20 trees per year. Oh, I want to cut more, but I persuade the committee that there are several thousands of trees per hectare, but they said, oh, the resource is limited. So natural resource is very important. So 20 trees, okay. So it's very, I continue to visit here for 5 years and accumulate collect the sample. The experiment is very primitive. I use a saw, printer, and ruler and shovel. But when I got the initial result and had the presentation in the conference, the expert of Dendrochronology requests to follow the proper procedure utilized by expert of dendrochronology, that is wind dendro and cross dating. Results are almost same, but I follow the experts. Let's move on to the results. To my happiness, there is a very strong relationship between the ratio of reaction wood, the extent of reaction wood, and the the size of mound. The mound size is calculated by the ratio of the deepest, the center of a mound and the edge of mound, the soil depths at the center and the edge of the mounds. And usually tree ring tend to be thinner and thinner, and the diameter is almost same in all directions, but the action would be different. We can find a lot of spikes in the tree rings, and gradually they tend to form reaction wood. So using this reaction wood, we can deconstruct the history of soil hammock formation. And the one of the novel finding is obtained from tree cell anatomy. If tree leaning is caused by the summer permafrost degradation, the lignin formation start gradually, but we found that the reaction wood formation started abruptly in early wood at the beginning of winter, the growing season. That means the tree leaning events occurred before growing season, that is winter. So we found that at least in this continuous, at least in continuous permafrost zone, drunken forest is formed by seasonal, as a result of seasonal hummock formation, not summer permafrost degradation that we can commonly found in this continuous permafrost zone, such as in Alaska. And then I also tried to reconstruct the soil hammock formation using tree ring history records. We found different shape between the clay, sandy mounds and clayey mounds. The sandy mounds reach saturation within 100 years, and the existing literature also says that even in clay mounds, they reach saturation within 100 years. Before climate warming start, but our results show that the clay mounds continue to grow in recent decades without reaching saturation, and that is the hammock formation is good for soil carbon storage accumulation. The hammock formation store more carbon than flat microrelief. And we compared the annual intensity of tree leaning before and after warming. After warming, there is a positive correlation between the mean annual temperature and tree leaning. So we can say the warming accelerates soil hammock formation and tree leaning, at least on shallow permafrost. Now, this is a possible mechanism. In cold years, the active layer is thin, so the packing active layer, the defreezing of active layer generate to small upward pressure, but so small power to generate some power of mound rising. On the other hand, in warm years, the deep active layer formation can generate the defreezing of deep active layer generate strong upward pressure and mound rising. That generates that can be the reason of tree leaning. Yes. So usually we know that the permafrost at the drunken forest formation is caused by the loosening or loosening soil foundation after the permafrost degradation, especially in discontinuous permafrost. But our results show that at least in continuous permafrost zone, there is an intermediate stage. The deep active layer formation and refreezing generate can increase the hummock formation tentatively. Yeah, this is the conclusion of the trailing and soil. And I also have analyzed how such drunken forest survive on such peculiar hummock soil. There is a positive correlation between the annual above ground biomass production and soil nitrogen stock. So in continuous permafrost, the plant growth is limited by the depth of active layer. The slope is a bit different between the sandy soil and clay soil. And in the clay soil, due to the presence of shallow permafrost soil, the nitrogen mineralization by microbes are highly limited. So the one hypothesis is the direct uptake of amino acid mitigates the nitrogen deficiency for black spruce. So I want to check whether such amino acid hypothesis is hold true in my drunken forest. But yes, in sandy soil, we found that, this hypothesis is true. But on the other hand, we found the loss of carbon in clay soil. But there is the the all dots follows the line 1.2 ratio. That is exactly same with the ratio of urea. So I tested whether the plant can take up urea directly or not. So I use the mixture solution of amino acid, urea, ammonium, and the nitrate, and the individual compounds are labeled individually, and then the trace experiment are conducted, and we found that in clay soil, the black spruce can take up urea directly, but not in sandy soil. Sandy soil, amino acid, ammonium, nitrate is the good nitrogen sources for black spruce. So there is a plasticity to take up nitrogen, and the reason is in clay soil on shallow permafrost, the nitrogen mineralization is retarded, and there is accumulation. We found the accumulation of urea on permafrost table. So the black spruce try to monopolize nitrogen by adapting to urea to have urea transporter in the roots. So this is the summary figure. This is very typical view of permafrost. But my study suggests that the shallow permafrost is required for black spruce, the drunken forest development, and drunken forest is highly rely on the soil hummocks and urea nitrogen uptake. Otherwise, they can't compete with tundra or white spruce or something. So, but the deepening of active layer will decrease the extent of drunken forest. That may change the carbon and nitrogen cycle in the future. Yeah, that today's talk was published in two papers, and that's all. And, yeah, when I was primary student, I wrote a picture in this way, but when I visit and have experiment, but there are too many mosquitoes. That was not what I expected when I was primary student. Thank you. That's all, and thank you very much.
Yeah, Fujii-san, thank you for the exciting interdisciplinary studies which cooperate the dendrochronology and soil science from the natural history viewpoint. It's really exciting. Yeah, any questions? Yeah, actually, I have two questions. One is, so is I think you show that the black spruce can update the urea in the clay places. Is that, do you think it's special for this species, or can the other species uptake the urea also in this habitat?
That's a good question. Yeah, for example, Arabidopsis it's a model plant. Has urea transporters, and when they are exposed to severe nitrogen deficient condition, that transporter is activated. When the inorganic nitrogen, ammonium nitrate, is not available, and maybe amino acid is not available, such extreme under such extreme conditions, they start to activate. And there is some one paper in permafrost zone that the only plant leaves, some plant can take urine directly, the animal urine directly on permafrost. That is also adaptation to nitrogen limitation.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Yeah,
but it's not common. It's not common.
It happens only in the extreme.
Extremely nitrogen limited condition. Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, and actually, I have another question. Why? I think it could be very simple, but please, it's happy to know that why the carbon stock is high on the hummock as compared to the normal topography.
That's a good question. One of the reasons is the presence of the lichen, the reindeer eating lichen is highly resistant to decomposition, and that is the lichen is dominant on the center of mount, and the edge and the depression is dominated by sphagnum species. So both is highly recalcitrant. Such uneven micro relief provides a habitat for lichen and moss that is resistant to microbial decomposition, I guess.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, thank you very much. And one more question. You can write, or you can even raise your hand.
What is maximum freezing depth of soil? This is not mine.
It's from Dr. Brian Simeon. I think let's discuss in the end. Okay, then thank you, Fujii-san. It was very exciting. Yeah. And I think the time is running, so I want to briefly introduce my own research now about how the climate change impact look like in. Can you see the slide correctly?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, again, I'm Makoto Kobayashi, a plant soil ecologist in Hokkaido University in Japan. Today, I want to talk about how the effect of winter climate change on the forest plant look like in northern Japan. Yes, I guess you already have some images how the boreal forest look like. Maybe you imagine the beautiful spruce forest or birch forest with many delicious blueberry as understory vegetations. And most possibly, you might think these forests exist in Canada or Alaska or Russia and Scandinavian countries. Yeah, that's true. But even if you come to northern Japan, I hope you can come in the future, you can also see the similar looking vegetations here. This is a map of the global distributions of boreal forest. And the colored area is the distributions of boreal forest. Here is the North Pole, and here is Japan. And here you can see that the northernmost part of Japan is in the southern edge of boreal forest in the world. Yeah, if you come to northern part of Japan, you can see birch, mountain birch, and spruce and fir, these boreal tree species, as you already heard in the Dr. Frelich's talk. But one big and significant difference is dense dwarf bamboo exists here as understory vegetation. On the other hand, we also have a lot of snow. This is a photo of our region, and as you can see, the snow can be deeper than 2 meters in depth, even in the lowland. And such deep snow influence the forest plant in various ways. Because the snow is highly porous structure, it can act as a functional insulations. Under the snow, even when the air temperature drops below colder than minus 20 degrees in Celsius, the temperature around the seedlings, a small plant is generally a bit warmer than 0 degrees. And this snow can protect the small plants from the frost damage, mechanical damage by wind, and harmful sunshine for plants during the winter. On the other hand, the deep snow and later snowmelt can delay the bud burst timing of plants. So in several ways, the snow influences the plants. However, such snow condition is changing. The latest IPCC reports the prediction of warming climate, especially at high latitude, including the boreal regions. And it is known that the warmer air temperature can result in the earlier snowmelt in our region. And here my question comes that how will early snowmelt influence the vegetation in southern edge of boreal forest? Yes, vegetation here is consisted both of boreal tree species, overstory tree species, and also the dense dwarf bamboo as an understory. However, these two components have been studied independently, so we can't compare the effect size, for example, of the influence of winter climate change on the two components of these vegetations. Yeah, this is really problematic to understand how the forest vegetation change as a whole vegetation. So my question gets more specific: how will early snowmelt influence overstory trees and understory bamboo in southern edge of boreal forest? And to answer these questions, we conducted a large-scale manipulation experiment in the university forest of Hokkaido University. By using a lot of such big heaters in the field, we have warmed up the entire part of the forest stands at 4 locations to know the causal relationship between the snowmelt timing and the plant growth. Yeah, such a large-scale manipulation was necessary because both dwarf bamboo and overstory trees expand their root horizontally over a large area, as you can see in these pictures. So to know the realistic response of these plants to the climate change, we should change the conditions at least for the entire body of these plants. Yeah, as a result of the snow manipulations, we managed to advance the snow melt timing by 2 weeks. This is how the contour look like, and the snow melt treatment plots look like. This 2 weeks area snow melt is a change of predicted by the end of 2050. And we found that the area snow melt can result in the area warm up of soil temperature in the SM plots as compared to the control plots. And we also found that this area warm up of soil resulted in the increase of soil nitrogen mineralization, especially nitrification, by activating the soil organisms such like earthworm, which act as a decomposer, important decomposer in our system. And when you looked at the leaf traits, we found only the CN ratio of bamboo leaf changed significantly. The decrease of CN ratio by the snow melt treatment indicate the relative increase of nitrogen content by the snow melt manipulations. So what happened to the growth spurt? Yeah, we found that shoot growth significantly increased, not for the birch trees, but for the bamboo. This increase of bamboo shoots caused by the increase of leaf nitrogen and coincidental increase of photosynthesis, which utilize nitrogen for the chlorophyll pigment and Rubisco enzyme, for example. Yeah, as a conclusion, in the southern edge of boreal forest in Japan, the advancing snow melt, the area snow melt is predicted to have positive effect on the understory dwarf bamboo, but not for the overstory birch trees. Yeah, this indicates that the influence of the winter climate change can be different between overstory and understory plants. And to understand the future of the forest vegetation as a whole system, we should study the reactions of these both plants simultaneously. Yeah, this study was conducted in Hokkaido University Forest, and our forest is really huge. It's 70,000 hectares and are open for your research activity from the world. So please come and use our forest. Yes, thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to have some questions. Thank you very much. Yes. Any questions?
Yes, I have one.
Thank you very much, Sato-san. Yes.
Yeah. So the point of your presentation is that after warming experiment for snow layer, it results in the increase in nitrogen in a soil, and that benefits only for surface layers, not tree layers. But the both tree and surface layers, they compete for the soil nitrogen. So why such a improportional result for the growth rate between trees and understory happened here?
Yeah, thank you for the good questions. That's a good point. And I think it's partly because of the differential leaf habit for these plants. You know, the dwarf bamboo is evergreen. And so soon after the snow melt, the evergreen has already have the leaves, enough leaves. And maybe they start the uptake of the nutrient earlier than the birch, and which can result in the increase of the nitrogen content in the leaf only in the dwarf bamboo. It's just my thought. So I should know how it happened for the evergreen tree species also.
Yeah, and how do you think about the possibility for the differences in vertical distribution of fine roots.
Yeah.
I mean that, yeah, when the surface layers tend to have the root in shallower than the trees, in such a case, this kind of improportional result in growth rate may happen.
Yeah, that's good point. I have checked the vertical distributions of the fine roots, and by using water stable isotope even, and to see from which depths they uptake the water and together with the nutrients. Actually, it didn't change between these components. I've thought that trees might distribute their fine roots much deeper than the bamboo, but it was not true in our case. So I think rather than the vertical distributions, I think it's the leaf habit difference might have much. Yeah.
Okay, understood. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Florian-san?
Yeah, Makoto-san, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. Maybe I missed it, but can you explain, has this experiment been done under managed or unmanaged conditions? And would you expect any differences here, A? And my other question is, apart from biophysical parameters that are changing, obviously, would you see any impact or let's say benefits or disadvantages for forest management, particularly harvesting measures in this area?
Yeah, thank you for the good question. You mean that did I do this experiment in the managed forest or unmanaged forest?
Right, yes.
Yeah, this was conducted in the secondary forests. In the past, there was a selective cutting of the major trees, but now it remained as it is for long. So it looks really like a kind of mixture of conifer and broadleaf trees, but it regenerated naturally, but there was some history of the management. And the other point is, the dwarf bamboo is super dense. If the bamboo shoots increase, it's really difficult for the people to go into the forest, and it's not nice for the local resident to get the bamboo shoots for their food, for example, and also for the forest management. It gets really difficult to go into the forest to do the management of the forest. So it's not the direct influence on the timber quality or something like that, but it can indirectly influence the efficiency of the forest management, I think.
Okay, thank you. And I just saw that there is another question from the audience in the chat. Let me read it out to you.
Yes,
you mentioned that earlier melting of snow has a positive effect on the growth of sasa, so the bamboo you're mentioning. However, it seems that the earlier the ground surface appears, it will have a stronger impact on feeding damage by deer. What about that one?
Yeah, that's a good point from, Suzuki-san. Yeah, thank you for the good questions. Yeah, it happened. Not for this case, but now we are running another project. And yes, if the snowmelt comes earlier, it results in the earlier exposure to the herbivory by the deers. Yeah, and also the rabbits. Yeah, that's true. So this kind of the biological interaction change by the winter climate change. Thank you very much.
And one more just popped in. Can you suspect the possible effect of early snow melting in the deeply frozen soil of continental areas on the soil processes?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, as I explained a little bit, our region is covered with a deep snowpack, and surprisingly, soil does not freeze at all. So our outcome or our results can be seen especially when you have the unfrozen soil. And if you go to the frozen soil area, such like in the east part of US and also in the continent, like in Russia, I think the influence of the area snow melt can be different. Yeah, thank you for the good questions. It's so the winter climate change influence is really context dependent, as in the concept of this, webinars. So it's, as you say, let's study. And another question comes. Area snow melting may also affect the water resource scarcity, particularly in April and May in Hokkaido, by making total water volume in the forest increase soil moisture drier. This is my curiosity. Yeah, that's a good point. I have also checked the water content in the soil, but it didn't decrease. We are not really sure, but this happened in several parallel projects conducted in northern Hokkaido. So which means that even when you see the area snow melt, it didn't result in the decrease of the soil moisture, at least for a few weeks after the snow melt. I don't know why, but one possibility is that the melted water by the treatment can stay in the remained snowpack on the surface of the forest floor and did not reach all the way down to the soil or even the groundwater so much. And this resulted in the absence or no change of the soil moisture, maybe. But we are not sure. But the similar phenomenon were seen not only in northern Hokkaido, but also in the eastern part of Hokkaido by the other scientists. So this is really important point. Thank you.
Yeah, a lot to study.
Yes, that's true. I'm really excited. And if you have interest in coming to the beautiful winter in Hokkaido, you are most welcome. Yes, to dig snow.
So before you close this webinar, I just wanted to thank everybody again, particularly, of course, the speakers, but what would be speakers without the audience? A great audience, great questions. Thank you so much. And for those who missed this excellent webinar, so the recordings will be soon up on our webpage, like the other two that happened already. So please visit our webpage, as I mentioned before, very simple, IBFRA.org, no at here. And well, now I would like to ask you to please find your closing words, Makoto-san. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for joining. And thank you, Dr. Frelich and Fujii-san. It was a very exciting talk. Yeah.
Thank you, Makoto-san.
Thank you very much, Florian. Have a good sleep.
Have a good day.
Have a good sleep. Yeah.
Bye-bye.